Okay, so thank you to my distinguished panel for joining us in South by Southwest this year. It's really exciting. Thank you to the folks at South by Southwest for including us. We'd like to talk about future equity and how to establish transformational blockchain networks. And I'm very fortunate to have such great experts on my panel. I've got Mary Hall from Consensus. I've got Todd Little from Oracle and Michael Ward Jr. from Austin Urban Technology Movement. And we're gonna, we hear so much about profit and making money all the time, and making sure that bottom line is good, and all that's good, but none of it means anything if we have unhappy people that can't function with their basic needs. And in Texas, we got to learn that hard lesson just last week. Where something we take for granted, as much as turning on the water to make sure that there's water, or making sure that you can sleep all night and be safe and not be cold. Those kind of things were big surprises down here, even though they're things we kind of take for granted. And so what I'd like to talk about today is how we can use blockchain as a way to actually transform society and solve some of the biggest problems that we're seeing in a really straightforward manner, and also talk about maybe why blockchain is the right answer for that. Not everybody that's watching the session will be blockchain experts and understand what it is. So, we can definitely delve into that some, about, well, why would someone want to use blockchain for this particular purpose? So I'd like to start by going around and introducing everybody. I'm going to give a real brief bio of myself. My thing that I'm afraid I'm going to forget is that I have a brand new book out. It's called AI and the Law, and that's AI as in artificial intelligence. It came out 2 days ago on O'Reilly Media, and it's free to read. You just log in and create an O'Reilly account. Some people have one already from work, but it talks about artificial intelligence and many of the ways that it can change our world, and why you want to be able to transverse the programming on artificial intelligence to make sure it remains true to its intention. And that's one of my particular ideas on how blockchain can be used for good. And I'm also CEO of Kilroy Blockchain, and I am the host of today's panel. So with that, let's go to Mary.
Thanks, Karen. I'm looking forward to reading your book. I am currently the product marketing lead for Quorum at Consensus, and also a product for auditing smart contracts called Diligence at Consensus. And I've been doing blockchain marketing for the last 5 years, starting with my stint at IBM on the blockchain team. Over to Todd.
Thank you for joining us.
No, thanks.
Michael?
Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Ward Jr. I am the president and CEO of Austin Urban Technology Movement, also known as AUTUM, and we bridge the gap between the Black and Hispanic communities and the tech industry. I'm very excited to be on the panel today with these amazing panelists. And Karen, thank you so much for the invitation. Looking forward to just building on the work that we're doing together.
Thank you, Michael. And Todd, you were with us last year as well when we did how to launch and grow next gen blockchain networks. And the year before that too, we were actually at South by Southwest. So go ahead and tell everybody about yourself, please.
All right, thank you, Karen, appreciate it. Yeah, I'm the Oracle blockchain platform chief architect. So the Oracle blockchain platform is a managed blockchain service that's provided by Oracle based upon Hyperledger Fabric. So we're focusing on permissioned blockchains and used in business to business enterprises.
Okay, perfect. And okay, so I'd like to start the questions. Let's start with let's talk about the pandemic first, and we're going to talk about what projects that you guys are aware of, and what you think is being done with the pandemic correctly, what could be better, and where does blockchain apply? How is it being used, and how should it be used? And I'm going to start with Todd on that one.
All right, thank you, Karen. One of the big issues around the pandemic has been, on vaccinations and being able to get information out and trustworthy information. So one of the huge advantages that blockchain brings to the table is that it provides provenance over data. So as an example, one of the projects that we've been working on with several other companies has been MiPasa. This is a data sharing platform based upon the blockchain, and it allows then people to be able to access and use data that's trustworthy because the provenance of the data can be shown based upon what's recorded in the blockchain. So I think, information sharing and correct information, there's been an awful lot of false information that's been distributed. There are a lot of incorrect sources of information. And by providing these trusted data sources, researchers and individuals can then go research this data, look at this data and see it and know that the data that they're looking at is valid and can be trusted.
Mm-hmm. And Mary, I believe you've been involved with MiPasa also.
I was involved in MiPasa during my time at Oracle when I worked with Todd very closely. And it's a fantastic project because it's allowing so much data tracking among multiple parties. So with that, you're getting not only statistics about the COVID infection rates, but you're getting information about where they are, demographics, people, ages, so people can really drill down on it. So that's one great use of blockchain to help scientists and health officials get the data. And also anybody can tune in and see that data on the MiPasa site. And get some information about areas that are, very badly affected. But there are other great applications that I'm seeing too during this pandemic using blockchain. There are people developing health passports. So you can see who has been vaccinated. You can verify the identity of the person, that they are an actual person, not a fake identity. And I saw that there's a program in Israel with one of these apps where you can show you've been vaccinated, show your passport, so then you can go dine at a restaurant, you can go to a gym, you can gain access to things because you can prove that you've been vaccinated. And finally, there are some apps coming out so you can verify your identity at the time you go to get the vaccination, which is very helpful. I mean, one of the disturbing things we're seeing is people faking their ages, faking where they live, going to other states, other counties to try to get vaccines. And so these apps could help prevent that.
Okay, great. And Michael, I've had the privilege of getting to know Michael. We're from the same town here, Austin, and I've had the great privilege of getting to work with him and tap into some of that energy that he's got that's so contagious. And we've spent nearly the past year working on a project called Casey. And Casey is a product developed by Kilroy Blockchain that's cloud-based. And what Casey does is it incorporates blockchain into recording the basic workflow that's needed for call center activity regarding contact tracing and scheduling vaccines and other type of reaching out to people and recording. And we've integrated that with an on-the-ground program that actually where we work with people in the community and get them trained and provide opportunities to grow in the area of doing contact tracing. And then, of course, the blockchain is used to make sure that the data has not been tampered with. And with that, I'd like to hand it to Michael to talk about that project, Casey and his involvement.
Definitely. And as I, just think through the benefits of a blockchain and how blockchain really connects with all of the above, the common thread is that transparency piece, right? And transparency is so key, especially when we think about opportunities that are coming in our society. And with the partnership with Clearway Blockchain, so shout out to Karen, Lynn, and the team over there, is that Casey provides an opportunity for us to leverage that transparency, but also leverage the opportunity that blockchain brings for the broader community. So one of the great things that we're doing through Casey is launching a contact tracing cohort. This contact tracing cohort is geared towards those that are underrepresented, predominantly that are Black and Hispanic, that are looking to make a transition into the tech industry. And right now, you probably think in the tech industry, where does contact tracing fit into the tech industry? And it's the transition of us leveraging technology more so into other industries. And healthcare is one of those industries, right? I'm assuming that you are familiar with telehealth or telemedicine. And we've seen the advancement of telehealth and telemedicine through this pandemic because of social distancing. And with the spread of this pandemic, now we're seeing the need for contact tracing to make sure that we have transparent information, right information that's on a public ledger or on a public platform that now individuals can go and check the credibility of what that information looks like and what value contact tracing will bring to whether it's employers, whether it's to associations, whether it's, we're looking to get back to in-person events. Contact tracing will provide a benefit to the community that Casey brings. But at the same time, we want to make sure that the opportunities that this new job develops on blockchain technology or other technologies that will come out in the future, we want to make sure those job opportunities goes to those individuals that are most in need. So when we think about blockchain technology, when we think about Casey and the work that Clearway Blockchain is doing, that there's a great connection between what's needed for our society, just as what's needed during a pandemic, but then what's the economic benefits to leveraging blockchain? What are the networking benefits that can be built for individuals that are most in need, right? What are some equitable ways that we can leverage this technology, whether it's through Casey, whether it's through MiPasa, as Marianne Todd talked about as well, or other opportunities that are now leveraging technology or leveraging blockchain to really dive deep into being transparency. Because I know in a lot of the work that we do, sometimes not everyone as transparent as they can be or as they should be. So we can do a better job at holding people accountable. So the Casey program and really doing the workforce development component, addressing the challenge of society, offering contact tracing, now address the challenges the pandemic has created is a great opportunity and a great benefit for individuals looking to see different ways that blockchain is really enhancing our society.
Yeah, and to the point of transparency, I wonder if Todd would mind just taking a second and explaining why blockchain provides transparency.
All right, thank you, Karen. So most blockchains are built on the idea that you have data that is, or transactions that are placed into a block. That's where the term comes from. And those blocks are then tied together through cryptographic hashes, which allows then you to be able to tell if there's been any tampering. So if any of the contents of any of the blocks is changed, any of the data is changed, then basically the hashes will no longer match. So you can detect this. You can't necessarily prevent it, but you can certainly detect it. So you know whether the data you're looking at is authentic or not, because if it's been altered, you know. And so that's, I think, one of the big advantages that blockchain provides as far as transparency. You'll know whether there's been problems. As well, the data is shared across all the participants that are in the blockchain network. So, or at least the participants who are supposed to see the data. Not everybody should see every bit of data. I mean, that's, there's the information about my health records I'd rather not share, but my doctor would like to be able to see that. So I can provide that kind of access through a blockchain network that would be potentially much more difficult with traditional systems. So the transparency is that you've got copies of the data, it's verifiable, and everybody has the same copy of the data. So there's a single source of truth.
Yes, and I just want to bounce that one back to Michael for a second. Now, given that now you can have things so they can be exposed, right? And it can be obvious if someone tampers with them. How does that help you in your mission?
Yeah, I was actually one of the comments on that because I like the simplicity that Todd leveraged to really break that down for individuals when we think about the transparency and having data that can be backed and be referenced or measured on, and making sure that we are talking about the same data sets, right? I think that is the most important thing when we talk about whether it's increasing representation in technology, whether it's addressing the wealth gap, whether it's addressing the skills gap. What data sets are you using, right? Because if I'm telling you there's a problem in a specific zip code or in a specific city, but then your data set is showing that the problem doesn't exist, well, we can't begin to solve that problem together because we're not leveraging the same data. So as I work with employers to get them to be more transparent about what their diversity goals are, as I work with other funders to be more understanding of the communities that we're serving, having a shared data set that not just one entity is using, but the industry is using, that's a different type of impact that we could begin to have, because now we can actually see, well, what has been the progress in certain metrics, whether it's how much time are you investing into underrepresented communities, how much financial investment are you giving out, what are your donations look like, whether it's in-kind donations, or we can begin to measure these things if they're on a public ledger that everyone now is referencing, and being able to hold individuals accountable moving forward. So having blockchain technology inside recruiting, inside the tech space as a whole, inside the healthcare industry, the financial industry, it allows us to eliminate potential fraud. It allows us to eliminate potential what's the right word? Individuals hiding behind progress, right? I think sometimes we begin to use certain levels of success as a reason for us not to want to continue moving forward. But if you actually open up the data set and get really granular, you actually see, wait a minute, actually not making any progress in these areas. And let me tell you why. So I see blockchain being able to be very strategic in the way that we can not just enhance our equitable practices across the board, but then really change a culture of true transparency and honesty, because now you can hold yourself accountable by the general ledger.
Yes, Mary, I wanted to talk about blockchain in supply chain, and again, this is all related. We've known for years that inferior goods get taken into areas that have a lot of people of color. I mean, that's just the way that the world has been. I know for my whole life. If people want something good, a lot of times they got to leave their neighborhood. And with these vaccines and things like that, now it's a matter of life and death. Are they being distributed equitably? Are they, being administered in an equitable way? And Mary, I want to ask you about the supply chain and the moving of goods, and it's a really big deal right now. For many, many reasons. And where have you seen blockchain help with that?
Well, verifying goods and services on the supply chain is one key use. One of the most disturbing things about the pandemic is the proliferation of fakes, counterfeit masks, counterfeit vaccines. There were parties in California doing fake COVID tests and charging people money. And they would show up and pay the money and never get a result because it was a fake test.
Wow.
Yeah, so beyond being able to have everybody have access to the shared set of data, you have the data in real time, you have the authentication of data from the shared common data set that is trusted. And you can also, as Todd indicated, identify the bad actors on the blockchain. So this is really valuable in supply chain when you're seeking to authenticate goods and services. I mean, there has been everything from fake honey to fake liquor to fake vaccines that has gone out and made people sick across supply chains. We've all seen in the headlines food recalls. and the ability to ensure freshness, also cold chain across the supply chain to make sure things are at a good temperature so they don't spoil, which is very important with the COVID vaccines right now. So these unique capabilities really help with supply chain, but also very important is enabling more collaboration among multiple parties. So we have been working on a very exciting agricultural consortium with Cargill and Covantis at Consensus. And that is to be able to bring all the growers together in Brazil and food suppliers for soybeans and corn. And so you can see how the flow of the agri-goods is going across the chain, making sure things don't run out, that these are actual goods and services from the verified suppliers. And so this is another great use of the technology for supply chain. And the final thing I want to mention is, so much of supply chains we forget sometimes are still paper-based. So now you're having digital assets, and these can be verified in real time across the chain. I know Todd knows this story about a shipping company that had, a 65% reduction in paper-based processes across their supply chain using blockchain technology. So it's really a great solution for those complex global supply chains when you have a lot of products and shipments going back and forth, and you need to verify where things are, when they'll arrive, and if they are the real thing.
Very interesting. Todd, do you want to add to that supply chain?
Yeah, be happy to. So one of the areas that we've been working with is a number of our customers who are focusing on supply chains, and in particular on the ethical sourcing of minerals. So one of the problems with these rare minerals is that they come from conflict regions. And so the goal of these companies is to be able to ensure that your supply chain is not using minerals coming from conflict areas. So by using blockchain technology to trace the provenance of the minerals from the time they're mined to the time they're processed to the time they're shipped and finally received, all that information is being tracked on the blockchain. So you know where the minerals came from, you know how they were mined, you know who mined them. And with that, then we can hopefully eliminate these sources of conflict minerals.
Okay. And Michael, your impression from Mary and Todd of supply chain and blockchain integration, how can you see that really helping communities?
Yeah, my initial question that I had for Todd or Mary, and feel free to respond to this, throughout this presentation, is, what is the preventable measures to keep that initial data set true, right? That first touch point. So I'm curious what your thoughts are around that. I mean, we could talk about that. But as I just, hear you all break down, or adding blockchain to supply chain and what that really means with tracking the ethical aspects of what you're doing, I'm just thinking about individuals or thinking about companies that are expanding into other areas, right? That are looking to branch out into underrepresented communities. Well, what are your practices for those areas? And we could create a standard, right, using blockchain to say, this is what you should be doing in these areas at the minimum, right? Anything below these steps aren't actually equitable because of X, Y, Z. So I'm seeing it as a rubric that individuals can be using to really measure themselves and use that as a accountable measure to justify why they are moving into certain areas and what needs to be done to really scale and grow in those pieces. But I would love for Todd and Mary to comment on that, or even comment on the initial touch point when you're looking for that first tracking with blockchain, making sure that data set is where it needs to be.
Todd, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll have to. Yeah, that is one of the big problems in supply chain, even with the use of blockchain, is that the data on the blockchain is only as good as whoever or however that information was collected. And so, ideally, the more stuff that can be collected automatically through things like IoT devices that can be placed on the shipments if it's a shipping issue, or if you have mechanisms to be able to test and validate the information that's being claimed on the blockchain. So things like, assay analysis of chemicals, this sort of stuff would allow you then to be able to put that information on the blockchain along with the other information about those minerals, and then be able to assure that in fact those minerals are as they're claimed and where they came from. So there's still an element of trust there in that endpoint data, I think, as Michael's getting at. And so that's a critical piece that has to be addressed, and technology alone can't solve that problem.
Mary?
Yeah, to add to what Todd said, I think one thing that blockchain does that's really important is verifying identities, that you are who you say you are. It's solving some digital identity issues in the world. So that's really important when you look at data, right? So you can verify the data about COVID infection rates came from John Hopkins, not Joe Schmo, who's trying to sell something right on the street, whether it's a counterfeit mask or take your COVID test, whatever that is. This was the verifiable source of the data. And then every party on the blockchain can have digital authentication to see that the assets, the data they provide are false. Now, as Todd said, it may not be tamper proof, but it is tamper evident. So you would see if there's a bad actor on the chain, who it is and what they put on that was not proper. So those are some of the benefits also for supply chain with the verification of the identities and the holders of the data.
So Mary, to take that a little further, how can blockchain be used to keep people honest? Keep the bookkeeper from skimming from the books because nobody's looking. It's just too tempting. When you're struggling to get by, and there's $1 million sitting there that you can funnel someplace else. I mean, those kind of things make criminals out of people. Make criminals out of honest people, that unguarded temptation. And what can blockchain do to deter this type of theft?
Well, I like to think of blockchain, and Todd, Michael, chime in on this, as the most honest bookkeeper in the world, the most honest accountant you'll ever have. There's no more paper-based ledger where I cross this out and put this in, or, fraudulent auditing for my company to make it look like I have more resources than I actually have. To bolster maybe my stock price or whatever. So you're getting actual data sets, you're getting verified identities, and that goes a long way into keeping people honest. And also the ability, when you can pinpoint who the bad actor is, that's a deterrent to be a bad actor in this model. If you're a criminal, you don't really want to be on the chain. That's going to be how you're exposed and found out. Everything's auditable. There's an audit trail left. That's your criminal's worst nightmares, that I can trace where you got your fake goods from or where you've forged something from. I mean, I've seen this a lot being used lately with the auction houses. Because there's celebrity goods or art goods that are actually historical, have significance. Maybe they're Queen Victoria's ring or something like that, where they can actually verify it. And we've seen this with gems. I mean, I'm speaking of Queen Victoria's ring. There's technology where you can verify it's the real diamond. It's the actual one. We know there's 40 different characteristics of the diamond, and they're all loaded on the blockchain. So we know that's really her diamond ring from, the 1800s, and it's verifiable. It's got the same characteristics, the same setting, all of that stuff. So these are some of the verifiers that are built into a blockchain model. And the things that you can input for unique items like the diamond identification.
Very good. Now, Michael, I'd like to bounce some of what Mary said off of you. Given that that blockchain can help to keep people honest by providing one transparent, tamper evident trail of whatever went on. How does that help community-based organizations to collaborate to take on big projects and big contracts?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about it from two perspectives as I was listening to Mary explain and share that information. So the first side of it is, number one, engaging with the same audiences and moving them out of poverty or moving them to the next level and increasing their quality of life. So if whether you're Workforce Solutions, whether you're Austin Area Urban League, Austin Freenet, any organization that's doing work, well, now if you're working with that individual person and they have access to their own data set and they want to give you that that access or that permission to view that information, well, now we're able to work with a unified data set that we were talking about beforehand, but then see where that individual has been beforehand, right? What type of services have they already gotten? What worked, what didn't work. So we're not duplicating the process, but actually streamlining that individual getting from point A to point B. And this is in all different facets, right? It could be in training, it could be in healthcare, it could be in food insecurity. I mean, I think Mary and Todd did a great job really explaining that blockchain isn't like just in one aspect, but it could touch many different things across our society. So let's leverage that to really be strategic with how we're leveraging technology or leveraging blockchain inside this space. So one is really around the client facing and making sure community-based organizations can actually collaborate to have a deeper impact inside the space. Then on the second side, when about honest actors, right, I go back and I think about those companies that say that they increased or their diversity behind X% of women or X% of those that are Black and Hispanic. Okay, well, what positions were those hired in, right? Are these entry-level positions? Are these part-time jobs, right? What is the retention and tenure of those people now, right? So now with the blockchain, we could be able to, start tracking those. And I do agree that certain quote unquote bad actors wouldn't want to be on there because it will be too transparent. But then that's how we'll know who's actually serious, right? It's like, hey, if you're on this blockchain, then that means you're committed to this goal and you want to be transparent. So you are willing to work through the process to get to the end result. And if you're not on blockchain, well, then you're hiding something, because there's no reason why you wouldn't be on blockchain if we know you increase efficiency, you increase transparency, you're increasing your collaboration amongst your partners. So then why not have blockchain really invested in throughout your organization so you can have that efficiency? And I think that's how we'll begin to see, the bad players, the ones that are serious, those that want to be a value add to our society versus those that are looking to either exploit or oppress certain individuals.
Yeah, and to add on to that, you're going to see through the digital identity property of blockchain who is disadvantaged. You could have that data. You could see who is maybe homeless, who's in the system getting benefits. There was a story in the Bay Area a couple of years ago, how they built the special housing for the underprivileged and disadvantaged, right? But Bay Area housing is so expensive, everybody wanted to get a place in the new complex, right? There were actually people working in Silicon Valley who tried to fake credentials to get in.
Wow.
Because the rent was so low. So that's a really valuable thing. You make sure the right resources are going to the right people.
And And to add to that, I mean, I think Mary or Todd, you all touched on this earlier, but we've seen that with individuals trying to go and get vaccines outside of their zip code, right? Outside of their area. They wouldn't do that for schools, right? They want to stay in their zip code for their best quality of schools, but now they're going into other areas that are really getting either, community, local, federal support, and they're taking advantage of the system, right? Because the system has these gaps that are now being exploited or being leveraged on by other individuals of privilege. But that's where we're able to leverage technology and leverage blockchain to really be that equalizer, right? And use this as one tool. I'm not saying this is the only tool, but this is definitely one tool that we can use in order to really move ourselves closer to being more ethical society.
And Todd, do you want to, that's a real good way to segue into my next question, which is, if someone wants to use blockchain as one of the tools in the toolkit to solve some of these problems, do they have to throw everything out and fire their team and start over? Or, how do they get going? Is there stuff they can salvage, or are they building something new from the ground up? Like, what is this thing?
Yeah, you've got to toss everything away. No, just kidding. What we're seeing is that in many cases, this is being used as incremental technology to enhance existing systems. So integration with things like ERP systems and stuff like that is critical, right? Because you're not going to get major companies to replace their existing ERP system just because blockchain became available. So what we're seeing is that people are integrating those ERP systems with the blockchain and then relying upon the blockchain data in the decisions that are being made in those ERP systems. So it's not toss things out. It's really right now it's integrate. As well, we have companies though who are building net new things. So they're startups who are building blockchain applications from the ground up. They're obviously in a different situation because they don't have any legacy applications to have to integrate with. Some of the bigger issues, though, I think, in getting started is that I like to refer to blockchain as a team sport. I've said this before, and it really is. It's the idea is to get people to work together, right? And so, getting companies to work together is always a challenge, right? Forming partnerships is difficult. Forming consortiums is even much more difficult, right? How do you get the businesses to work together, and potentially businesses that compete with each other? Right? How do you form a marketplace and something like that? How do you make sure that people can trust one another in that environment? And that's where blockchain really helps, because now you have this shared source of truth that even competitors can be using and be able to work together to do that, to perform, for marketplaces, for so even supply chain, so bidding on contracts or any of that sort of stuff, that all can be placed in the blockchain and be trusted, but it's still the business side of it that's going to be the difficult part, I think, for many companies.
Is it super expensive for somebody to add blockchain as an audit trail to something that they've already got built? Is it a huge commitment?
No, it isn't necessarily. We've done POCs and stuff like that and pilots that have been accomplished in a matter of a couple months. So, it depends upon how ambitious you are, how deep the integration is. And then as well, those are oftentimes the situations where it was a single company that was doing this. When you've got multiple companies working together, it gets much more complicated. But that's what we need to address, right? And that's one of the things that, I think is one of the upcoming problems with blockchain is how do we help companies form consortiums to be able to work together?
And now how can we also transfer that to the community-based organization world would be, another question that I have, if anybody wants to grab that one.
I would actually say the way you get companies to work together is through community-based organizations. That is the missing link when we think about initiatives. A lot of time, companies roll out initiatives kind of from the inside out, thinking that they know what's best for the companies, or they know what's best for the community, instead of reaching out to the community and bringing them into the conversation, saying, hey, we want to help you do X, Y, Z. How can we support you, right? And a lot of times that organization is working with other partners, right? Most of the time that organization have other companies that they're working with as well. So I think if we think about it from employers looking to help their community versus help themselves, that I think we'll be able to see a change in what work actually gets done. So I would say community-based organizations could really be that equalizer, and we're seeing that here in Austin, right? We're seeing workforce solutions bring together community-based organizations, bring together institutions, bring together employers to then address a goal collectively. And now we're doing the same thing around digital equity, having those conversations around broadband, and really being a stakeholder in that conversation. That's one of the reasons why Autumn, why we participate in conversations like these and attend the meetings, because we know that missing piece is one of the issues that prevents from us having the impact that we need to have. Because the level of impact that we're looking for, it's going to take multiple organizations, multiple companies, right? Multiple governmental departments and governmental leaders supporting this overall push to move in a different direction.
That makes sense. And okay, so let's see. How so we've got this scenario where we're integrating community-based organizations with for-profit organizations to try to find out what's really needed in communities. How is this all managed? Like there's a process that's called governance that Michael and I as part of our project we took we had a company come in called Governance Alive that teaches a governance process where multiple organizations can work together and they agree. It's a consent process as opposed to a consensus. It's like, okay, yeah, we agree that this is okay, even though this may not be how we would do it from the beginning. This is okay enough to move on. And then that gets recorded in blockchain as being the decision. Now, Governance Alive had nothing to do with blockchain or AI. They're a team that teaches teams how to work together. They teach companies how to collaborate and work together. And so it's been really interesting, our class with them. And then Lynn, my business partner and chief information officer, she's getting a certification through Governance Alive. And so then that way we at least have some type of a framework for implementing. Okay, the group needs to make a decision. They made the decision. Here's the recording of the decision, and then now we can implement this and maybe add it to a smart contract. Anybody want to add on to that? And Todd, you're smiling.
At Oracle, we believe governance is going to be one of the big issues that has to be solved. I mean, there are solutions right now, but what we're looking for is governance that's based upon blockchain. So on-chain governance. Right now, most blockchains are governed by sending emails or whatever else, and the consensus is reached that way. We'd like to see a consensus reached on the blockchain. So one of these we're going to be focusing on is how do you govern the blockchain network on the blockchain network itself. So who's consented to deploy this smart contract as an example, right? If there's multiple parties involved, they probably all want to look at that smart contract. They all want to validate that the smart contract does what it does before they're going to deploy it in their environment or even agree to make use of that smart contract. So those are all sort of governance issues. And as I say, right now that's being done through haphazard mechanisms. We want that to be formalized and placed on the blockchain. So as you say, those kinds of decisions are recorded. And then as well, the actions associated with those can be automated because we've agreed upon what the actions are. I don't need to necessarily have an operator go and make the modifications, whatever it might be, deploy the smart contract, create something else. That's all agreed upon and automated by on-chain governance.
Mm-hmm. Can you just go into what a smart contract is, because it could be that we have some viewers that haven't heard that term.
Smart contracts encompass the business logic or the transaction logic that has to take place for something to be considered valid. So in transferring money, it would do such things as verify that you've got that money, that the account that you send it to is authorized, you're authorized to send that money. So all that kind of logic is stored in this thing called a smart contract. And each of the members of the organization or the consortium, their nodes are going to execute that smart contract and they're all going to agree upon the results then. So that's the consensus involved. For the developers out there, if there's some, one way to look at a smart contract is like a stored procedure in a database. So you execute that stored procedure because that's where your business logic is, and you want to share that business logic across other applications. Blockchain smart contracts are effectively like that. So you hand them some data, they make the decisions based upon the business rules, and then either agree to or not agree to support that transaction or to authorize that transaction.
It's, organizing that business logic that if this condition is met, then this will happen and the contract will execute, right? So you have that. And then the nice thing about blockchain, one of the great features is, going back to Queen Victoria's ring, if, I'm the buyer at Sotheby's, I know if this special diamond is in this setting with this many carats, with this special look and feel, then it is her diamond, and then I'm executing the sale. So something like that.
Great explanation. So it sounds
Yeah,
like
and
this is something that becomes part of the workflow, ongoing workflow of the organizations involved. This constant review of how things are working, rather than just make a contract, stick it in a drawer, and forget about it and do things whatever's the easiest way. Now we've got things programmed in. And we need to make sure that, hey, we don't want to throw it over the wall to IT and forget about it. So, how will business change based on this whole process? What are you seeing?
What we're seeing is that we now have corporations who potentially compete now trying to cooperate on building basically programs, right? And that this isn't something that we've seen very much. Maybe standards organizations have done this, but competing organizations or others generally don't work together to develop software, right? They may agree upon the standards, how they interact, but the sharing of the development of it is something that I think is relatively unique. And you're right, these things are not going to be, you write them once and they're there. Smart contracts get upgraded on a regular basis, and it's again by consensus, right? So the parties involved agree that, yes, the smart contract needs to be updated because maybe our business rules have changed or something else has changed that requires an update. So they're a living program, basically.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And okay, so we only have a few minutes left, and I'd like to shift the discussion over to the crisis that we just had in Texas. And we've got these brilliant minds here, and I'd like to go. I know none of us are energy management engineers. I don't think any of us are. You don't know with this group, but I don't think any of us do that for a living. We're not energy engineers. But we do know about workflow processes. We know about people. We know about communications. We know about equity. And let's just go around to each person and touch on that. How do you think blockchain could have helped prevent some of the horrible things that we went through in Texas? I'm going to start with Mary.
Well, I think, there's a growing number of use cases for energy regulation and utility regulation on blockchain. So everybody can see the uses, the status, people across the chain. I know Nevada's done a lot of work on this. I think perhaps if some of the information about the energy resources had been on blockchain, perhaps people might have realized there was a risk with a big winter storm that everything was going to be out, because my understanding is the grid wasn't in great shape to begin with. There had been a number of upgrades recommended to it. And so perhaps there could have been some projection on the needs and what they needed to do to be met. But that's, just design thinking on my part. I know that energy regulation helps people see where the resources are and also help control the pricing of the resources. So, you might not have gotten so many people with the $9,000, $10,000 energy bill because they would have seen where things were at and maybe procured other resources. Again, that's conjecture, but possible design.
Where you could have even third parties that review things as they're happening.
Mm-hmm.
That makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
I 100% agree with everything that Mary said, from both aspects of allowing blockchain to be that proactive, I would say, that proactive tool to see what needs to be done based off of historical data as well, given the fact that this is not the first winter storm or freeze that Texas has experienced. I believe the most recent one from a freezing standpoint was 2011, where the recommendations were submitted in order to make the necessary changes to the grid. That was not done. So, that's where I see allowing, even moving forward now, right? Leveraging and implementing, blockchain right now on the regulation of energy moving forward because we're just getting started with renewable energy, right? I think we're just, on the tip of the iceberg to really dive into what that looks like for the remaining lifespan of society, right? But with that being said, we could start that now. But then secondly, on just general design, thinking about, what should have been done as well, is that, taking the recommendations from the experts, listening to experts inside this space that know what needs to be done. And then at the same time, truly, truly, truly value your people. Because I think, the number one thing that I would credit, that I would put on this, is just leadership. Leadership needed to make the right decisions for the community members. And, some people did die, right? Lives were lost in this situation. Individuals' homes were impacted. So there's definitely accountability that needs to be done with this. And blockchain can help with this. But then at the same time, if you have the data, but you don't make the right decision, it still goes back to leadership and what needs to be done.
Okay, Todd?
Yeah, I think part of it is a lack of data and a lack of understanding how that data relates to other things. So, one of the things I heard, and I don't know a lot about the situation. I'm in Colorado. We get this kind of storms all the time. So, but one of the things I could see is that, one of the decisions that was made, or something happened that I understand, is that electricity was cut off to the pumps that pump natural gas. And the natural gas was being used to generate electricity. So you get into this horrible spiral here, whatever. I would think that if the decisions to what properties or what areas to cut power was a decision that was made on the blockchain based upon a lot of data that would indicate that, oh yeah, if you cut the power here, this is going to be a problem over here. So that kind of data that you could trust and make a decision on, and maybe even automate that decision, blockchain would be a potential technology to be able to support that. It's probably not the only technology, but it certainly would be one that would ensure that when you're making decisions, you're making it based upon the most current and accurate data.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, Todd, that across Texas, everyone's situation was different. And that's where the question mark comes in, right? And if this was a winter storm across the state, why is every individual's, even within the same zip code, right? So even within the same zip code, someone could have different reactions or different impacts throughout the winter storm. And that's where I see blockchain really eliminating the disparities, right? And the challenges with that, but really creating the process, right? If X happens, do Y, right? I always loved math, growing up. Math was my favorite subject because you have a definite answer. There's no gray area, right? And I think we need that same logic by leveraging data when we think about some of these societal challenges and societal issues that are happening in our society.
Okay. And I have one last question, and then I'll open it up to anything anybody wanted to add. I mentioned that I just wrote a book called AI and the Law, and I learned a lot writing that book. I learned, though, that AI is much further along than I thought it was, and that it's in a lot of things where I don't realize it's there, and that a lot of the programmers feel like it's already getting away from them. There's a lot of lawsuits about AI. There's a lot of baked in bias because AI is based on two things. It's based on data and algorithms. And if the data is already got bias based into it, like conviction records in court, for instance, from biased judges, then the AI learns that, and it becomes that and incorporates it into it. And now, because AI is based on such basic things, you've got identity, right? You've got identity of programmers, you've got the identity of the AI systems themselves, of the systems that they run on. You've got the algorithms, who introduced changes and when. Is this even a real programmer, a real person? And then how do you make sure that the data hasn't been tampered with? How do you prove that the training set is what it was intended to be? How do you make decisions about what this AI is supposed to do? What's the intent of the AI now in 2021? But maybe the intent of the AI might change in 5 years. Something that's used for early release for setting a bail amount might be used to predict who's going to be a criminal. We don't know. And there's just tons of lawsuits. But the thing that keeps ticking in my mind is I think blockchain can be a tether to help keep AI under control in a lot of different aspects. And I just wondered, I want to throw that one out there. Whoever wants to take it and give me their thoughts on how blockchain may help humanity deal with AI.
Well, I'll take a first whack at this. So, one of the issues around machine learning models, as you mentioned, is the data sets, right? So the data sets, if you can't verify that the data that you're using is accurate and unbiased, then the results of your machine learning algorithms are going to probably be incorrect as well, right? They'll show that same bias as you're mentioning. In loan examples, so loan applications. It's conceivable you'd have an AI application that would make a decision about a loan application, but it's going to do that based upon a whole lot of data sets that have already been analyzed by the machine learning algorithm. And as I say, if you record the decisions that are made by the AI algorithm and you've recorded the data that's used, you now can show that the algorithm wasn't biased, but maybe the data was biased. And so again, by having provenance of that data, you can potentially then identify biased sources and eliminate those from your training. And as well as say, if you record all those decisions, then you can basically backtrack and say, yeah, I did this correctly based upon the data I was fed.
Could you potentially undo things that AI does on its own as it starts to program itself? Could you use blockchain to backtrace that, you think?
I'm not sure about.
We'll have to ask AI, huh?
Yeah.
Mary, did you want to?
I really can't add on to anything beyond what Todd said. I think he really covered it.
You had mentioned identity early on, and
well, identity again is verifying who inputted the data, right? And you can verify the source of the AI algorithm or the thinking behind it. Again, that it's not Joe Schmo, that this was some business with real data, real results, real things that they took into the consideration for the AI.
Okay, and Michael, do you want to add to that one?
Yeah, as I heard Todd kind of just discuss that and break down, see where some of the options can be. What I was thinking from my perspective is leveraging blockchain, possibly, mind you, this is not my wheelhouse, but as a learning mechanism, right? So if the AI algorithm has already learned one practice, well, it doesn't mean it can't learn something else. So I think that if we connect blockchain, and this is me just thinking through the process based off of information from Mary and Todd, right, and what I know as well, but if we leverage the blockchain to kind of learn to teach the AI algorithm something new that will allow them to overcome some of the bad habits that they already have learned, I think that'll be something interesting. But the immediate thought that I went to was that identity for Mary is that if we could see where the original data set was originated from, well, then we could go back to that individual person or that individual entity and see whether or not that was biased, whether or not that individual had the right parameters. And then if that data set is accurate, then we could trust what the end result is of that. But we would have to go back in history and see what that looks like. But that's what I thought about as I see leveraging blockchain and AI in that regard. And then I was also thinking about, is that the next, evolution that we're going to see, blockchain and other emerging technologies, but in what capacity, right? Is it going to be blockchain and AI? Is it going to be blockchain and quantum computing? Is it going to be blockchain, and who else knows, what's going to be the next feature of really combining these emerging technologies together?
Excellent. Yes. And does anyone have any parting words? We can just go around and, if you want to sum up things or just say where you think AI could really help or not AI, but blockchain, where blockchain can help with social good and create social good and how people can start. So Mary, would you like to start that one?
Yeah, I think some of the ways it can really help with social good are digital identity You know, you see these people who are refugees fleeing countries. They don't have time to take their paper-based education certificates, their passport, maybe their driver's license, all these identity documentation things. Having those as digital assets on the blockchain, so you can say you are who you say you are, prove who you are when you get to your new location. That's a tremendous revolution for the world, for good, to help people, and also to help them get resources. I know the UN has done a lot of work with blockchain and UNICEF as well. I've seen applications that have helped the homeless built on blockchain, so that, again, they verify who they are, that they are in the situation where they need the aid, and it facilitates them getting social services. So, and then the finally, you know, proliferation of fake food supply or drinking water or drinking supply. I mean, this could now happen in Texas with the shortages there, where you could see people come in to try to sell fake things. Blockchain is a great way to verify goods and services, and then by that ensure safety for the people who receive them.
Okay, who wants to go next?
I'll just chime in and just say, for me, the number one thing that comes out is transparency. I think transparency is a missing link in true accountability measures. I think that without full transparency, you really can't hold people accountable, and people like to go back on their word or say miscommunication or confusion. But with blockchain, you're able to eliminate that. So I think, you know, even the thought about like smart logic, right? Creating the process, and then regardless of the situation, this is the process that you do. And I think that will really be a benefit to our society, because a lot of times we allow the situation to dictate what we do versus just creating the framework. So whoever's framework, they get to this outcome. And I think if we did that more so in our political system and our economic system, I think we'll see a more equitable lens across the board in different areas.
Excellent. Todd?
Yeah, so you know, I think one of the areas that, or some of the areas that we're seeing blockchain really being adopted is around things like credentialing. So, you know, can you prove that, and this is a little bit related to what Mary was saying, can you prove that I've got a degree? Can I prove that, you know, how I did on that? College transcripts as an example, so, or even primary and secondary education transcripts. If those are recorded in the blockchain, an admissions counselor has trustworthy data to be able to make decisions about admissions. You know, your doctor, would it be nice to be able to know, oh yeah, I can check out his credentials in a trusted form and verify that, yeah, this doctor really has the degree that he claims and has practiced how he's practiced. I'd like to know that. And I think by putting this information on a blockchain, we can make that information available in an accountable fashion. So, you know, but fundamentally, I think that the real issue comes down to trust. I think it was The Economist magazine several years ago labeled blockchain as the trust machine. So it really enables the increase of trust between interacting parties. It's really what I think it really comes down to. Can I trust the data? Can I trust you? Can I trust the procedures? All that sort of stuff. Blockchain helps ensure that trust is met.
And trust and transparency go hand in. Yep, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, and on that note, we'll conclude. And I just want to recap real quickly that blockchain doesn't have to be a monstrous project. You can say we have this workflow that we're doing. Maybe it's on paper, maybe it's already in a web app or something, but we just want to add blockchain to it. To start down the road of learning how to make data trustworthy and transparent and tamper evident. So collaborations can happen more smoothly, and honest people stay honest. So thank you very much to all of my guests. And I really, really appreciate your expertise and your time. And I know it wasn't easy getting this together with the pandemic and storms and, you know, water blowing out all around us. And but here we are, and we did it. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Karen.
Thank you.
Michael.
Thank you.